Hello, thanks for tuning in. This is Stuart, record dealer, record collector, classical. I've got an anecdote for you, which I think you might find interesting from the heyday of my record dealing days. So I was effectively dealing in records from I think 1992 all the way to 2000, 2001. I was still selling them as late as 2010 because when I stopped buying, I had about 10,000 records left, and I basically managed to sell virtually the whole lot except for maybe the last two or three hundred, which I kept, mainly Mozart records, and which I've still got to this very day. And I'm building up my collection, building up my stock. I've got a website. The URL is above if you're interested. So let me just tell you this anecdote about a collection that I bought in from a famous person. Yeah. Okay. So it was 1997. I remember it well because it was the year that Tony Blair came to power. Okay. So I was already quite an experienced dealer. 5 years in, I had very good customer base in the Far East, South Korea, Japan mainly, Taiwan. Plus I had some very good American customers and European customers. So I was quite well established. And I got a phone call. In fact, it was actually one day before the general election in 1997. It was from a very well-spoken gentleman who lived in the south of England. He had a collection of about 400, 500 records that he wanted to sell. Now, I lived in Nottingham at the time, and I wouldn't usually travel so far without trying to determine the quality of the collection. But because he sounded so well-spoken, etc., and so credible, I decided to take a chance on it and just drive down. Now, that was unprofessional. That was unprofessional. You should never go on that kind of criteria. Just because somebody sounds upmarket, sounds like they come from, I don't know, they live in maybe a £2 million house or something like that, it doesn't necessarily follow that they're going to have a good record collection. I knew that already. I already knew it. I'd had experiences of it. I'd had experiences of going to rundown areas and into a house where the record collection was absolutely fantastic. And I'd had other experiences going to a really upmarket sort of middle England village and finding one of the worst collections you could ever see, where they bought nothing but budget labels, and they were all in poor condition. So there are no indicators beyond the actual evidence of the records themselves as to how good they're going to be. Nevertheless, I decided to take a chance on it. I was irrational, and I drove down, and of course I asked him what his name was, and he just said his name. He said, "Just call me Richard." I said, "Okay, Richard. I'm Stuart. Look forward to seeing you." So, by the way, I apologize for the light. I've had sunlight shining in. I set the video on manual light exposure, and unfortunately, the sun has gone, and it's suddenly gone dark. I'm not going to stop this video to adjust the lighting, so I hope you're okay with that. So I drove my car down. I had in those days, I had a Passat Estate. I've still got a Passat Estate. It was a good car for buying record collections. Fold the seat down. I could get in. How many records could I get in there? To be honest with you, I could get in as many as sort of 12 to 1500 records. Now, that was overloading the car, and I was pulled over by the police one day and put onto a weight bridge. And I wasn't fined, I was overladen. And I had to actually go through the records and dispose of those that were worth nothing to get the weight down before they would let me continue. So anyway, that's an aside. Let me just come back to this collection, because after all, he said he had about 500 or so I knew I'd be okay with the car. Yeah, I got down there. It was this, I can't remember where it was exactly. I think it was in Hampshire. So yeah, it was quite a long drive, actually, quite a long drive really, but it was a nice day. I remember it was a very sunny, lovely warm day. It was already clear that Labour had won the general election. I knew that much, and I had no feelings about it either way, because my interest in politics had kind of drifted off, and I thought, well, we've had the Conservatives since the days of Thatcher. Maybe the country's due for a change. Tony Blair seems like more of a moderate, right of centre, if anything, politicians. So I wasn't too concerned about I didn't really pay much attention to the general election, but I was aware that a Labour had won. So yeah, it was a big house. It was a Tudor style, 2 levels, big place. I mean, in today's money, I would expect it to be in that particular area, probably like a £3 or £4 million house in today's money. In those days, it was probably like a £1.5 million house. And I thought, well, this looks good. This looks good. Remembering what I'd already said and that I should have known better, that the only thing at the end of the day that looks good is a quality record. That's all. A quality record. That's the only evidence I needed. Not that it was a beautiful house in a upmarket English village. So yeah, I knocked on the door. In fact, as I remember, the door was open. It was a lovely sunny day, and I think the cherry blossoms were out and everything, and the birds were singing. It was like idyllic. And this gentleman appeared. He had sort of salt and pepper sort of hair, and he was about sort of 5'5", 5'6", something like that. And he was wearing sort of squarish glasses. And he said, "Oh, good morning. Are you Stuart?" I said, "Yes." "Hello." He said, "Oh, I'm Richard." And so I said, "Oh, hello, I've come about the record collection." He said, "Yes, of course." And he showed me into a room where there were several cardboard boxes, more than several. There was probably about 10 cardboard boxes. And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "Well, if you give me maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I'll go through them, and then I'll offer you a price if I'm interested in them." Okay. So as he was going away, I suddenly thought, wait a minute, he looks familiar. And I thought, I think I've seen him before. What did he say his name was? Richard. I sort of put it out of my mind. I thought, well, look, I'm here to do the business. So I started going through the records, and I was inwardly groaning because this was not a good collection. This was not a good collection. I was regretting that I'd taken the chance, and I knew I wasn't going to be happy driving back because I'd come a long way, and this was not a good collection. I mean, there was lots of classics for pleasures. They weren't in particularly brilliant condition. There were some 4-digit ASDs, there were some Deutsche Gramophones, but there were maybe a few narrowband SXLs. But it looked to me like this collection had been built up from maybe the early to mid-70s onwards. It wasn't impressive. There was really, I mean, it was like, it was worse than bread and butter type of records. I mean, sure, yeah, I could make money out of them, but it was going to be a pain dragging this lot back to Nottingham. Nevertheless, he came back, and I looked at him again. I thought, oh, I don't believe it. I think I know who he is. I said, "Oh, is your name by any chance Richard Baker?" He said, "Oh, yes, it is." I said, the newsreader. I said, "Well, it's nice to meet you." And, I used to watch you from the mid-70s onwards, and, it's a pleasant surprise. Yeah, well, it was a pleasant surprise to meet Richard Baker, the newsreader, and I'm sure that anybody who's watching now that grew up in the UK and was born, shall we say, I mean, I was born in 1964, so I knew his name from about the age of 10 onwards. Yeah, so he was obviously a famous newsreader, probably the most well-known newsreader in the country at that time. I'm not sure if he'd retired at that point, but yeah, okay, so that was nice. That was kind of interesting that it was Richard Baker, but his collection was very, very poor. And he said, "Oh, have you had a chance to look at the records?" I said, "Yes, I've been through them." I said, "Well," I said, "Look, I'll be blunt with you. There's not really a lot here that I can sort of make money out of in terms of collectibles. It's really sort of very bread and butter kind of stuff. But I can offer you £50 just to take them off your hands." And he said, "Oh, as much as that?" I thought, oh God, why didn't I say £10? Yeah, it's really funny that he, I don't know whether he was joking when he said, "Oh, as much as that," or, yeah, okay. Then I obviously got the records into the car and I was off. But just before, while I was getting them to the car, going backwards and forwards, I said to him, "Oh, I believe that Labour have won the general election." And he stood with his hands on his hips. He says, "Oh yes, so they have." He said, "I do hope everything's going to be okay." This is after, you know, um, 17, 18 years of Conservative government and the absolute shambles of John Major's government. I don't want to get into politics, but yeah, I just thought that was funny. Okay, yeah, so obviously I got the records back and I pulled out those which I thought I could make some money on, and there wasn't really much, to be honest with you. The rest of them went into my garage, and I had customers who would come and buy records from that garage for £1 each and take them. So, I mean, I still made money, of course, out of that collection, but I always like to, for the sheer journey that I did, I always like to come back with some nice records. And that day I just didn't. I didn't come back with anything remotely interesting. Okay, well, anyway, that's the story about how I bought Richard Baker's record collection. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.